Record. All right, so thank you all for coming out to tonight's meeting of the FSU chapter of the International Association of Emergency Managers. Tonight's meeting is tips and tricks for landing an emergency management job with Pinellas County Emergency Manager Jessica Geib. Jessica Geib, she currently serves as an emergency manager with Pinellas County, Florida, which is around the Clearwater, St. Petersburg area. She has served as the chair of Florida Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, as state liaison in emergency disaster services for the Salvation Army, academic liaison and internship coordinator in external affairs for the Florida Division of Emergency Management, and director of community involvement for Florida's capital area chapter of the American Red Cross. She graduated from Florida State University with a master's degree in public administration and social work, as well as a bachelor's degree in social work. And she's also a Florida professional emergency manager with the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association and a certified emergency manager with IAEM. So I am so pleased to have Jessica Geib speaking to us tonight. I thank her for speaking to us. And whenever she is ready, I pass the floor over to her.
Awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you see? It's just my screen. I don't have a PowerPoint or anything. I just wanted to make this a casual, I guess, hangout. It's happy hour, right? So let's just have a good conversation. My name is Jessica Geib. Thank you so much to you guys for having me. Florida State, of course, is near and dear to my heart because I've been a Seminole for a very long time now. If any of you are in the Pathways class through the EMHS program, I actually helped to write that class. So I hope that you don't hate that class and you aren't dreading it if you're in it, and that you found some value from it. We had a good time when we were putting that together and teaching that years ago. But that being said, if you've got a question at any time, I'll ask our leadership here to kind of monitor that, but feel free to pipe in if there's a question about something I say or something you want to know or something maybe that we can chat about. I want this to be an open dialogue. And I want you to get some value out of it. So thank you again for having me. I'm going to start by just giving you a little bit about my background because I think it's a little bit different or more non-traditional than you've probably seen when you think of emergency management. And so I've been in emergency management for 17 years now, which is kind of crazy to think about. And I want to say I fell into it by pure luck, but I also knew what I wanted to do when I was a kid. So it's kind of a weird combination. For those of you that may have heard about, or if anybody remembers Oklahoma City bombing, which was a long time ago, I was a kid when that happened. I watched it occur on the television, and I watched the first responders respond, and it caught my attention. And I saw the Red Cross responding to that. I didn't know exactly what it was that they were doing, but something in me said, that's what I want to do. And so I didn't know exactly how to get there because I didn't know what it was, or what sort of career path would lead to that. So I jumped into social work in college because that seemed like a nonprofit kind of connection to make. I did my undergrad at FSU in social work, and I did my internship with the American Red Cross. I failed a class and I had to take my internship and put it on the back burner for another semester, which at the time, of course, was devastating. And I thought my mom was going to kill me and my life was over. But it ended up working out in my favor because I started my internship the very day after Hurricane Charley made landfall here in Florida. So if you've heard about the infamous 2004 hurricane season, that was our first hurricane that year. And so I hit the ground running, not having a clue what I was doing or what that meant, but it seemed very exciting. And I jumped right into the Red Cross. As a matter of fact, my supervisor, who is now a very, very dear friend and mentor to me, she said, yeah, well, we were surprised you showed up because you stood us up last semester. So here's a clipboard. We need you to go run a shelter in Central Florida. Good luck. And I think she kind of thought that I would just disappear. But whatever that was, I couldn't get enough of. And like I said, we kind of navigated that 2004 hurricane season back to back to back. With that, I guess I got lucky, and because there was funding, because we all know after a disaster, there's money, the Red Cross hired me as their director of community involvement. Now, mind you, I was 23 years old and I had gone out on some hurricanes and had a really fun time and worked really hard, but I had no idea what it was really that I was doing. But I knew emergency management and disaster was sort of what worked, and it seemed like this is what made sense to my brain and how it all worked out. So I worked for the Red Cross for a little bit. We then the next year navigated Hurricane Katrina response, which if you're unfamiliar, we saw, what happened in the Gulf. What a lot of people don't know is that the impacts Florida felt as far as survivors coming over to Florida, specifically Tallahassee, because that's where I was working. And so we set up disaster survivor assistance centers, and we processed thousands and thousands of survivors who came through from Hurricane Katrina. And I guess you could say the rest is history. I worked for the American Red Cross for several years, and then I moved over to State Emergency Management, which of course is located in Tallahassee, Florida. When I was working for State Emergency Management, I was housed in the External Affairs Office. So that took all of that media training that I had from the Red Cross and kind of put that to good use with community outreach and public outreach. But what my main position was there was that I was the Academic Liaison Internship Coordinator. So to sum that up was I took students just like you and I helped them find jobs and help them find success in the field. And so I'm proud to say that still now, 15 years later, there are students who keep in touch with me. They have way cooler jobs than I do. They're probably making way more money than I am. But it's really fun to see the success that that's brought. And again, and I'll talk about this later, but emphasize how important that networking piece is to our field. Because again, those students still keep in touch. I'm still doing references and recommendations. And I'm proud to say that I've helped over probably close to 250 students find jobs somewhere in emergency management. So it's just really exciting, something I have a passion for, and I just like doing that, making connections for people. So I worked for the state for a while. Doing that, I also liaised with Florida State University. That's where we came up with the Pathways class, which if you're not a part of the program, is like a prerequisite for students looking for internships. So basically it's a whole semester long of what I'm going to try to cram into about 45 minutes tonight. And it's just a prep to get students ready to be interns, but more importantly, to be ready to work in the field of emergency management. So we had a good time doing that class. Had a lot of success stories, had a few not success stories, which are always the most fun to share about the students who are long gone from the field now, and I'll never name names, but got some war stories there. From there, I was awarded a position with Salvation Army Disaster Services. So I was located at their Florida division headquarters here in Tampa as a state liaison. And so what that entailed was using those relationship and connecting skills to help strengthen the Salvation Army disaster relationships throughout the state and really throughout the country. And so I worked with state emergency management, I worked with our local emergency management, I worked with our local Salvation Army offices and connected those relationships and helped strengthen those programs. I was able to deploy quite a bit when I worked for the Salvation Army because we cover the entire Southeast territory. So I went to Texas for Hurricane Harvey. I went up to the Carolinas for Florence. And then of course, Florida got back-to-back events. So I deployed quite a bit to Tallahassee. So it was like coming home again for me, which was fun. But again, it was more and more of that relationship building. And you'll see throughout really what I'm going to share again is the networks are important because the networks carry with you your whole career. So then from the Salvation Army, I wasn't looking for a new job. I loved what I was doing because I got paid to build friendships, right, and build relationships. So I like to say I had the greatest job in the Salvation Army. But this opportunity with Pinellas County presented itself. And so I am an emergency manager in Pinellas County. I have a unique role in that I actually work in the Human Services Department. And so human services is really the people part of what you think about when you think about local government. So things like our veterans programs, our homeless service programs, our emergency housing assistance programs. So I take all of those pieces and parts of programming that human services does, and make sure that they're ready for a disaster, because we know disaster impacts all sectors. So how can we strengthen that? How can we be ready to respond better and to build towards recovery better? Because after a disaster, we all also know that recovery really falls on your human services department, because it's helping people rebuild their homes. And so human services plays a huge role in proper disaster recovery and partnering with our nonprofit world. And then how do I make sure our own staff is ready to respond? So sheltering is really our big role in Pinellas County as far as human services. So how can we make sure our folks are trained, that we're ready, and that we're just ready for hurricane season, right, in a few weeks. So I would like to say that it kind of came full circle for me, that I took that social work part of, how my brain originally was wired and tied in that emergency management piece. And I get to do both, right? The human side of it, and then also the preparedness planning part of it. So that's just a little bit about where I came from, my background. So you kind of know where I'm coming from. I mentioned some of the disasters that I worked. I've worked a lot of national disasters. I've worked a lot of local disasters. I mentioned hurricanes, of course, but things such as the Pulse. Salvation Army played a really leading role in the response to the Pulse. Most people may not realize is that the night of the event, Salvation Army locally was called into the area to help manage all of the food donations that were starting to come on scene, right? Everyone wanted to give pizza and donuts to the first responders, and that's fantastic, except what do you do with hundreds of pizzas, right, in the middle of the night? And so one of the beauties of the Salvation Army response is that we can craft our response to meet the needs of the local disaster a little better than some of the larger nonprofits can. So we were on scene that very next day, helping to manage all of the donations that were being left on site. And for weeks, we were the only nonprofit actually on scene that was providing respite care to all of the first responders. So that's the investigators and the detectives. We actually set up a triage tent out of the way of the scene that they could walk to give them a break from what they were doing. Because as you can imagine, it was pretty intense work, and allow them to get a meal, allow them to have a listening ear, a cold drink, and just a moment to reflect on what was happening. And then we were also able to provide some services to some of the survivors and their families. So that, of course, got started thinking of, what other response roles do we have? And now I can use those skills in what I'm doing with Pinellas County. So a little bit about what I do in human services, because again, you don't traditionally think about human services and emergency management. I'm very unique in that I'm the only county human services emergency manager in the state of Florida. Lots of different departments have folks that do similar to what I do, but they don't have like a position just set on doing emergency management. So I work directly with our department director, and I work directly with our county emergency manager. Again, I mentioned, we prepare, we get our folks prepared, we make sure our programs are ready. But we also do a lot of connecting in our community, especially with our nonprofit community, ensuring that our nonprofits are prepared, that they're strong, and they're ready to also respond and recover our citizens as quickly as possible. One of the things too that there's a fly in my house. One of the things too that I wanted to share with you was what we're doing, what we have done, and what we are doing as far as response to COVID, because it's a disaster that I don't want to say none of us were prepared for, but we've certainly had to stretch our own skill sets and develop processes and procedures that none of us ever thought we'd be looking at, especially, over a year later. And so some of the projects that we've worked through in the human services emergency management sector in Pinellas, our first project that we're really proud of is the non-congregate sheltering program that we put together for our homeless citizens. Pinellas County has a very large homeless population because it's a beautiful place to live, right? We live where people vacation. And so one of the things that we wanted to get ahead of really early was, if we have an outbreak in one of our shelters, or if we have an outbreak with some of our homeless tent communities, how do we get ahead of that? Because we knew it was going to really be a problem. And so we put together our non-congregate sheltering program. There was no guidance on how to do that. So it was a bunch of us sitting at the table saying, here's what we know our homeless citizens need, and here are the partners that come to the table every day. How do we put this together to work? So that included things like finding a hotel that would be willing to house potentially positive homeless clients, the mental health stigma and issues that come with homeless population, and what partners do we need to pull in, because we knew we were going to have some challenges there. Things such as wraparound services, right? If you think of a regular citizen, if you put them in a hotel for 2 weeks to quarantine, they need food, they need medicines, etc. What other things do we need to consider when we consider our homeless population? And unfortunately, sometimes that means, alcohol and drug addiction. So how are we going to work with those challenges, and who do we need to bring to the table to help us manage that? And then, of course, Department of Health, because they are the lead on the COVID response. And we needed to make sure that the medical care that was being not necessarily provided, but just managed and triaged was high level, because we know our homeless citizens come with some extra, sometimes health concerns as well. So we sat down, we put this plan together. The state said, get it together, we'll send it up to FEMA. And Pinellas County was the very first county in all of the southern United States to get a plan approved by FEMA Region 4. So we were really pumped about that. We were really proud of that. And we were able to share that plan with a lot of our partner counties and states so that they could create something similar that worked for their programs. So we actually still have residents in our non-congregate sheltering program a year later. We've served over 200 unique individuals, some of them multiple times, who have either tested positive for COVID, didn't have a place to go, or were exposed and needed to wait to quarantine until test results came back. So we continue to manage that program as long as there's a need, and we'll just keep going with that. The next project that we did as far as COVID was testing. If you remember back, and it seems like a million years ago, testing was a huge issue. There weren't enough products, there weren't enough PPE, there weren't enough tests. There weren't enough people to manage. And so in partnership with emergency management, we helped staff several of our local testing sites, which we're finally happy to say closed this past week. So as you can imagine, that's a huge lift, being able to provide testing, especially in a state where the weather plays a role in that. So there were lots of days where our afternoon thunderstorms had to shut down our site and reopen our site. So that's a unique challenge that we always had to think through. Another unique opportunity that Pinellas put together from COVID was a working group concept. And so for those of you that are familiar with the ESF concept, it's very similar to that, but we knew that the community partners that needed to be at the table for COVID aren't going to speak our language, and they won't necessarily fit into those ESF boxes. So we created 16 different working groups in Pinellas, and they ranged anywhere from, I think we had a mortuary working group to business and industry working group. We had a homeless working group, a feeding working group, sheltering. So you name it, there were different working groups that were able to navigate all of the unique challenges that arose from COVID. Some of those groups are still meeting today, such as our community well-being working group. And it's actually been pretty amazing to see that some of these partners that didn't traditionally talk are now still coming up with creative solutions for our community beyond just COVID, but thinking about hurricane season. So now we have this strong network of community partners, such as our Hispanic outreach, who are meeting with our faith-based groups and saying, how can we do a better job of getting our citizens prepared for a hurricane? And then how can we do a better job of helping them navigate? And so those working groups really were a true testament to the collaboration of the whole community of Pinellas County. But that's one of the things that I did, was play a big role in helping to connect all of those pieces together and help them continue to move forward. And then, of course, vaccines, which is, what everyone's still talking about. We're still operating our local vaccine distribution. We played a huge role in helping to staff those vaccine sites, both with county staff as well as with temporary staff. So we're still working on those. We're still managing those, and just working on right sizing as vaccine distribution continues to change and shift as it does every week. So those are just some of the things that, as an emergency manager, I wish I'd paid a little better attention when I took public health, because I thought, I'm not into this. But it's interesting to see now our entire year was really dedicated to some of those concepts and the lessons learned from that. So I imagine we'll spend a lot of time moving forward of how we can improve those processes. So now the good stuff, while you're probably here, what you want to hear is, how do I get a job in the field? So I have, I guess probably about, I don't know, 10 or so kind of tips, tricks, things that work, things that don't work that I want to share with you. And this is really the part where if you've got questions, I guess Stefan can interrupt because it's hard for me to see hands being raised, but I want to make sure that we're having a conversation. And that if you have thoughts, you don't get lost if I keep talking. So
If I could interrupt really quick, Cody Macon put in the chat a few minutes ago, are these working groups and concepts similar to the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association working groups?
Sure. So that's a great question. And I'll talk a little bit more about FPEM, but FPEM, if you don't know, is our Florida Association of Emergency Managers. I'm a huge proponent of getting involved with that, and I'll talk more about why and what you can benefit from that. But FPEM has working groups for members that range in a variety of topics: mass care working groups, web EOC, technology, very similar concepts. The difference is that our working groups were local, right? So it's the Pinellas players, all of the folks who have a stake in our whole community. And then the FPEM working groups are really the working groups for the professionals. And so that's where you'll have your professionals from different counties and state members and private sector members, your nonprofit partners, who come to the table and do problem solving all the time. The challenge was with COVID is none of us had time to meet together because we were so ingrained in our own local communities. And so had we had more time, it would have been very beneficial to bring some of these concepts and struggles to FPEM, because everybody in every community had the same challenges. We just didn't have the time to sit around and come up with strategies because it was happening so quickly, but it's the same concept. Okay, so the first one, and you've heard this a million times, and if an emergency manager ever talks to you and this is not the number one thing on their plate, stop listening, is networking. It's all about who you know, especially here in Florida, but really worldwide. I can't tell you how many times I've deployed on a disaster. Perfect example, when I went to Houston for Hurricane Harvey, I didn't think I knew anybody in Texas emergency management. I walked into the city of Houston EOC, didn't know anybody, ran into 3 or 4 people that I had worked with on a disaster. And all of a sudden I had that credibility, right? Because we knew each other. We'd been in the trenches together before and we'd kept in contact. So it's all about who you know. A question that I get a lot is, especially for students starting out, is if I don't know anybody, you know, how do I network with someone? How do I get a mentor? How do I connect with someone? And especially now that technology is kind of the new thing, it's easier than ever. And so I highly encourage you, get on LinkedIn if you're not already, friend people on LinkedIn, follow what they're posting and ask questions, right? The more they see your name, they're going to be familiar with your name. And so really connect with folks. It's a great idea if somebody shares an article or someone's doing a talk. Even if you missed the talk, follow up with a message and say, hey, I was really interested in XYZ that I saw you post. What are your thoughts about this? Or I missed this. What are some of the concepts that you shared? Emergency managers, and really everybody, if I can let you in on a secret, love talking about themselves. So ask them questions about themselves, right? That's how you can make that connection. So don't be afraid to reach out on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid to reach out via email. Don't even be afraid to reach out, you know, with a phone call, especially if it's someone that you've met and they've given you a business card. Follow up and say, hey, we met at this event and, you know, I was interested in learning more about whatever it is that they do. But make sure also you've done a little bit of research, because it's very disheartening when a student will reach out and say, hey, I met you at, you know, the governor's hurricane conference. I thought it was really cool. You worked for Red Cross. I haven't worked, you know, currently you work for Red Cross. Well, I haven't worked for Red Cross in a long time. So make sure you know what you're asking before you ask, and just do a little bit of homework. People will definitely be open to talking with you, especially in Florida, because we're used to connecting with students and people are always looking for really sharp students to hire. So don't be afraid to do that. Connect on and network, call, text, email, LinkedIn. Let's see. Are there any questions about the networking? That one hopefully is pretty given. Another question, just thinking about that, is somebody will say, oh, I've emailed someone and I didn't hear back from them. How long should I wait? I think it's okay to follow up a couple of weeks later. I do want you to keep in mind, everyone's still buried deep in COVID and getting ready for hurricane season. So everyone is really crazy busy right now. But I think it's okay to follow up a few weeks later and say, hey, just in case you didn't see this, mostly because people think, oh, I'm going to get to that. And you just forget. At least I do. I'm terrible about that. Number 2, lock down your social media. And this is really the most fun that I had teaching on the Pathways class is we would take a day where students didn't know it was coming, where we had other students research their social media and pull the things that they found that were public. We never said any names, but we found some pretty inappropriate, crazy, shocking, you name it, things from not locked down social media. Now, I know there are all kinds of HR rules about HR pulling your social media and what's private and what's not. Fair enough, but also in our world, we all talk. And if it's easy to find a picture that's maybe not appropriate or a post that's not private from when you were 13, just by searching your name, you want to make sure that you've done your due diligence and cleaned all that up. And in addition to things that maybe not be appropriate, think beyond just pictures, etc., language. Think also like political views. And I'm certainly not saying that don't be vocal about what you believe in. By all means, do that. But think about who maybe you will be working for or who you'd like to be working for, because employers may research that, especially in the private sector. And if you're going to work for, say, state government, be very aware of who your governor is because you work for that governor. And so you just want to make sure that you're thinking through all of those things, because they may check. And not only will they check, if someone says, oh, do you know anything about this student? And we're calling our network of friends, the word will spread. So it's really hard to erase something that's already kind of publicly known. Any questions about social media? All right. So the next one is get your resume reviewed. And there are lots of different ways for you to get this done. I know FSU Career Center has resume review. They also do like mock interviewing. Those are great. I will warn you just a little bit about those is they're coming from professionals not necessarily in the field of emergency management. So some of the language or the acronyms that we're all familiar with, they may not be. And so they may not know exactly how to word something that is pretty specific, such as trainings, etc. This is a great time for me to plug FPEM. So that's the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association. That's the Florida IAEM Association. It's got county representatives, state, federal. We've got private sector, hospitals, you name it. The membership is about 800 strong. It's really the place, not only where the work gets done, but where the business, and by business, that's the networking, the relationships, the jobs get done. There's a FPEM student membership. It's $25. It's incredibly affordable. I highly encourage any student to be involved, especially because if you're looking to get a job, someone's going to check. And if they see that you're a member of FPEM, that's going to speak very highly for you. There's also a student higher education FPEM working group that you can get involved. You can get involved with any of the working groups. A lot of times students say, well, I don't know where to do because I don't feel like I can contribute or I don't understand really what they're talking about. The student group is the place to start because it's got academics, but it's also got students. So they're talking about job opportunities there. They're talking about the field of emergency management as far as academia, as far as campus emergency management. So I highly encourage everyone get involved with FPEM, get involved in a working group. If you're interested in mass care, get involved in the mass care working group, technology. There's a whole long line of different groups. Plug in, reach out to somebody in that group, introduce yourself, and get connected. Let's see. So that's where I was going, was resume review. Also, as a perk for student membership in FIPA is there's a line of professionals who do resume review. And so it's a free perk of being a member. They'll give your resume to one of the professionals that does hiring, usually like an EM level director, who will critique your resume and provide some feedback on it. Things such as making sure it looks clean, making sure it's concise, making sure it's clear, making sure your typos, your misspellings, your fonts are all very standard. The worst thing is to get a great resume and there's a typo on it, because for me, it's out automatically. If you're not that structured to look for detail, I can't have you writing a plan for me, because that's how important those little details can be. So just really putting extra eyes on that. Include your trainings on your resume. If you don't have many trainings, go online. FEMA has 1 million free IS courses. Even some of their G level courses are being offered online now. So now is the time more than ever that you can just load up your resume with getting lots of free training. And then another question I get is, this job is looking for a certain amount of time with experience. I don't have experience in emergency management per se. Emergency management is more than just EM. It's a certain skill set, right? We can teach emergency management, but what's more challenging to teach, or what I'm really looking forward for, is someone who can do public speaking and is great at public speaking, has experience with public speaking, someone who's a good writer. A lot of times, some of these companies, especially the private companies, are going to want a writing sample. So you're going to need to really work on improving your writing. And then you're connecting and your liaisoning skills, right? Because it's all about building relationships. And so highlight the clubs you've been in, highlight those programs. If you've written something for a program, highlight any sort of public speaking that you've done, because those skills are all transferable. And that's what we do most of the time, is public speaking and writing. People think emergency management is exciting, and it is, except there's not a hurricane every day. And so you spend a lot of time behind a desk or a lot of time talking to citizens. So make sure you highlight those skills, even if they're not emergency management specific. The next one is volunteer. If you can't get a job, volunteer somewhere. There are 1 million nonprofits who do disaster relief, emergency management, who are desperate for volunteers. Last year, I rotated off as the chair for the Florida Organizations Active in Disaster. We had 100 members statewide who activate during a disaster, or do recovery during a disaster, or long-term recovery, or unmet needs. Check out that website, look for one of those nonprofits, and start volunteering. Now more than ever again, it's I like to say the best cash cow ever to be a student looking for a job, because there are 1 million opportunities to volunteer or even work with COVID response. So if you're not doing something in the COVID response world right now, you're missing out, because the opportunity, I've never seen anything with this many opportunities before. So get involved with a nonprofit, get involved with the Department of Health, get a temp job, anything to do with the COVID response, but volunteer, just volunteer. Shout out to Team Rubicon. That's good. I have a funny Rubicon story. I won't share that, but they are a great organization.
Oh, by the way, we have a question in the chat from earlier.
Yeah.
Brian asked, what's the best way to take classes right now during COVID? Looking to obtain a job in emergency management, but highest level of education is high school diploma.
Yeah, so I would say that's definitely, it's a challenge. I think it's shifting the way our world looks. So when I first started, emergency management in higher education wasn't a thing, right? No schools had a program, or was very limited. Now we're seeing PhD programs in emergency management. And so we're seeing where the academic world is catching on to this little secret of emergency management. And really it's professionalizing our field, which is a huge shift. So I think it's going to be even more challenging as that continues to get a job if you don't have a degree. And I'm not saying you need to have a degree in emergency management. I think any degree, if you can show that the skills are transferable, again, the public speaking, the writing, you have an opportunity there. But again, if you're not looking at more professional education, taking those classes, those FEMA classes, the IS classes, which are free, the G level courses, which a lot are being offered online. The state has a page called CERT Track, SERT Track, TRAC, which lists any of the classes that the state has going on, many of which are being offered virtual right now. So you can log on, take those for free. So look into that. A lot of states, I think, are probably offering some virtual classes for free as well. Another thing that people don't often think about is our nonprofit community. The Red Cross and the Salvation Army both also offer a lot of training opportunities. And those classes all count towards credit for your professional emergency management in Florida or your international CEM certification. So look into those as well. Just think beyond kind of the norm, but there are lots of opportunities for education out there. That's a great segue.
Also, really quick, Cody asked me on a private message about, you mentioned a website about Florida volunteering.
Oh yeah, so the Florida VOAD, it's VOAD, and I don't have it handy, but I will send it so that you can send it out. If you just look up Florida VOAD, that should pull up the web page. It should list the membership. Also, if you're not familiar with what VOAD is, just a real quick, there's an umbrella organization called the National VOAD, and each state has their own kind of chapter of that they fall under, and then a lot of counties have local VOADs. And all that is a network for those nonprofit community or those nonprofit organizations to network together so that they can respond better during disaster. So any of the organizations that are on the National VOAD page, Florida VOAD, even down to your local communities, if your local community has a VOAD, you can either get plugged into one of those organizations or even volunteer, offer to volunteer for the VOAD because they're always looking for people who could take on projects for them as well.
Yeah, we'll definitely send out that website with along with the recording and everything. So anyone who's interested in that, make sure to sign up on the sign-in sheet, link in the chat, and you'll be added to our email list, so you get all that stuff. So yeah, thank you again for that.
Perfect. Yeah. And that's a great segue. Just talking about getting involved. I talked about the value of FEPA. I highly recommend getting involved in FEPA. They have the different working groups, which are easy for you to get plugged into. The student membership rate, which comes with all sorts of different perks. FEPA is also where you'll hear about any job opportunities when they first get out. So anyone in our field that has a position open, the first thing they're going to do is send it out to the FEPA membership. So you're going to get that opportunity right away. So it's how you hear about it first. FEPA also has an annual meeting every year, which is the conference, and then we have mid-year meeting, which will be coming up in August. There are lots of opportunities for students to come, learn, get plugged in, network. A lot of the work of the association, like I said, goes on after hours because that's simply where people get to know each other and network. I've hired lots of students from those positions, just networking through FEPA and through the Governor's Working Conference. So a huge plug for FEPA, get involved. There's also a more formalized mentorship program that FEPA offers that I co-chair that committee. It is for anyone really who's really starting out in the field. So this would be for like a first year, second year professional, gets connected, matched based on their interests with a professional that's been in the field for a long time. And so it's about a 9-month commitment. And there's it's pretty structured because there's a lot of different benchmarks to meet. So it's really a great opportunity for those new professionals to learn from those seasoned ones. But it's an application process, so I definitely recommend looking into that as well. The next thing is Governor's Hurricane Conference. I know Stefan is one of our scholarship winners this year. So Governor's has a student scholarship opportunity. Unfortunately, we're not meeting together. It should be this week, I think, was going to be Governor's Hurricane Conference in person, but we're hopeful that next year we will be together. But they do offer a scholarship opportunity for students. It's a pretty strenuous and pretty cutthroat application. Some of the students that we get, because I'm also on that committee, are pretty high quality. And so I highly recommend anybody interested to apply for that. You have to be, I think, within 6 months of graduating. So if you are a current student or you'll just have graduated by next year, I would recommend looking into it. Just some tips if you're going to apply for that is to make sure you complete everything thoroughly. You max out all the numbers and the training hours you can get for training and for courses. Make sure when you're writing your essay that you answer all of the questions pretty thoroughly. Because like I said, we get some pretty high level students really from around the country who get opportunities to attend the conference. But I've hired several students from that batch of students at the mixing and the networking opportunities that we have. So get involved with Governor's Hurricane Conference. Also, if you win the scholarship, there are some volunteering requirements at the conference too. So that really gives you an opportunity to meet with people and to just learn from some of the professionals. This is one of the neatest things I think that came out of that opportunity. And I was talking with a student is they were like, yeah, I got to meet so-and-so and I got to meet so-and-so. And they were like, the amazing thing is those names were like in my textbooks. And you think about it, the textbooks that many of you are using, and I imagine they'll be rewritten soon because of COVID, but are referencing the 2004-2005 hurricane season. Well, many of the professionals at the conference are starting to retire, but some of those are still hanging on. So you really get to interact with folks that wrote the history of how we do emergency management. And so it's just a pretty unique opportunity to be in Florida and to get to, have a cup of coffee with the person that your textbook wrote things like pod distribution with. So highly encourage anyone in field, any student to look into Governor's Hurricane Conference. Another component of that real quick, since I get to plug it, I chair the student presentation part of that. So there is opportunities for students who are doing research in emergency management or related field, meteorology, anything like that, to get selected to present their research in a workshop at the conference and have a poster created and on display all week at the conference. So again, we're not doing that this year, but next year we'll be back bigger than ever, and we'll be looking for some good student research to be able to allow students to present again. And then finally, of course, because this is IAEM, I highly encourage you to get involved, not just with the student group, but with IAEM on the national level. They also have a conference. It's a little more costly, but you'll see a different perspective of emergency management. In Florida, we're a little group and we do things the Florida way, but it's also, I think, a good opportunity to see how other places do emergency management and how other states do it, not only because you'll see how advanced Florida really is in some of our planning and our response, but also you'll see a different perspective of just some different hazards and how they respond to disasters. So get involved with CEM as well. They have working groups as well. I highly encourage you to look into getting involved on some level, one of those professional organizations. And of course, once you've gotten some years under your belt, applying for your certification either through Florida FPEM or through IAEM, CEM. That's a lot of ABCs if you're following me. That's like the #1 no-no, right? Don't use all of the acronyms. Okay, trainings. I think I already mentioned this. Take as many trainings as you can. They're everywhere. They're all virtual. Not all. A lot of them are virtual right now. So look into those and look beyond just emergency management. Think about terminology such as risk management, continuity, business continuity planning, plan reviews. There are lots of different opportunities beyond just the words emergency management, both for training and for jobs. And so get creative. We're seeing now, especially with the fact that COVID has impacted everyone's daily operations, we're seeing all kinds of different businesses that never thought about, continuity planning, all of a sudden looking for someone who can help them write a technology continuity plan. Well, that's emergency management. And so think about that. We know Disney has emergency management team. Publix has an emergency management team. I have a student who works for HBO emergency management planning team, and that's a really cool job. Continuity planning for HBO shows before they come out. So just think kind of beyond that little circle of who we are to really what it is that we do, because there's opportunities for that too. Let's see. I mentioned some of the different kind of cool jobs. Just really today I have seen, and this is just going to list off a couple. I've seen some FEMA posted some jobs, which would be perfect for people just newly graduating. The state has a couple of jobs, state emergency management, that is perfect for a newly graduated student, state FPEM. There are several local jobs out there right now from different counties. I think Culla's got one open, Alachua's got one open. I'm sure there are more. I've seen lots of different private sector companies, consulting companies who are hiring like crazy. These consulting firms like Haggerty, IAEM, DSI, they can't get enough staff because they're being contracted by state, by FEMA to staff some of these projects. And so there are lots of private sector job opportunities. Now they're temporary and they're contracts, but that's going to get you some experience and they pay pretty good. So that's also going to probably help you out. But look into those. And then of course, I can't forget our nonprofit community. Salvation Army is hiring right now. I saw that job posted today. Red Cross is almost always hiring because they do have a lot of jobs. So look into those non-traditional jobs and get your foot in the door. Department of Health also is hiring lots of temp workers to help with case contacting and vaccine support. So there are lots of opportunities, even if it's just a temporary job, to get some of that experience. Let's see, another question that I get a lot too is for career transition. So if you're looking at emergency management as like a second career, I think a lot of people sometimes have challenges in finding out how to do that. Especially we see a lot of retired military, fire, police who are looking at kind of a second career. Take the trainings, of course. My biggest, I guess, piece of advice is this doesn't take away from the value of the skill set you bring, because again, you bring some leadership skills, public speaking, maybe writing skills. But remember, emergency management is emergency management, right? And come in with the attitude of, I'm here to learn, even if you think you already have the experience of doing it, because emergency managers like to be real protective of that term, emergency management. And so there's nothing more insulting than a retired fire chief come and say, well, I've done fire for 30 years. That's fantastic. You have, and I've worked with some incredibly smart, sharp emergency management fire chiefs. But remember, you're coming in as the new emergency manager. So just highlight those skills that you have, but keep in mind, emergency management is its own field, especially as it's starting to evolve professionally. Just a couple more things. Again, I think I mentioned this before, emergency management can be taught, but those skills are really what are going to put you apart. The writing skills, public speaking, problem solving skills, the liaisoning and relationship building skills. Those are all things that you can highlight whether you have the career experience or not, because you've participated in different groups or different organizations, or even just different part-time jobs. You may have those skill sets as well. Finally, and this is really the big thing, is make sure you right size your expectations. It's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting, the shift we're going to see in our profession over the next couple of years. And what I mean by that is right now, there are lots of jobs in emergency management, COVID response, et cetera. And a lot of these jobs are paying pretty good salaries, especially for overtime, et cetera. So we're seeing students coming out of school, getting these jobs, making a great salary. But again, these are all going to be temporary. So I think we're going to see a bit of a challenge when the money starts to dry up from COVID response and people are looking for opportunities in the field of emergency management with the expectation that the salary is going to carry with them. I don't think that's going to be the case. Because again, to make, I want to say good money in emergency management, because if you're working for the public, you probably never will. And it's certainly not about the money, but it takes time to make a certain salary. And especially coming in, if you were lucky enough to get a good temp job and then you're moving into your next opportunity, keep that in mind, is that your salary is probably not going to be the same simply because the money is not going to be there. And we see it too after a hurricane when there's lots of recovery dollars floating around and all of these recovery jobs come out and people are making good money for 2 years and the job dries up. So just right size your expectations, but capitalize on the opportunity while it's there. And I'm excited to meet some of you, work with some of you. Please reach out via LinkedIn if you've got questions. We've got time for questions now, I guess. I hope some of this was helpful, but if not, at least we had happy hour together, right?
So we do have some questions in the chat before we kind of open the floor. Giovanni asks, what were the biggest challenges you faced in the EM field and how do you overcome those challenges? I guess mainly in the beginning of your EM career.
That's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. I don't know if this will necessarily pertain to you, but so, we hear emergency management is kind of that good old boys field, and it's changing a lot. But if you look at the demographics of it, it's old retired men, right? Old retired white men. And we're seeing that shift, but coming in as a young girl, in any woman, I think at all, you're going to have some additional challenges to overcome. You're going to have to earn your seat at the table. It took a long time to do that. And sometimes still when you come to a new table, it's easy to be dismissive over the fact that I look like a young woman, but know your stuff. And this really advice can pertain to anybody, but one of the best pieces of advice that I heard, and it was geared more towards how do you as a woman in emergency management hold your own at the table. Number one, always sit at the table. If you're in a room, be at the table. Even if you don't know what to say yet, be at the table. And number two, and this is really the good piece of advice, is I always, when I'm going to a meeting or I'm in an event or something, I'm always 2 steps ahead of whatever I think is going to happen at that meeting. I'm always thinking through, okay, if this happens, here's my response to this. Here's my response to this. So that if that question comes up, I've already thought about it. I already know what the answer is going to be. I'm always a step ahead of that. And sometimes I don't need to use that and I just wasted my time thinking about it. But sometimes when someone says, okay, here's our problem, what are we going to do now? I've already thought about what we're going to do now. And that puts me a step ahead. So always be thinking about what is that next step that I need to be thinking about.
Okay, and I see that Mark asked, are you aware of any international opportunities for non-US citizens? I am in Canada, but willing to work remotely.
That's a great question. I know for a time, some of the organizations were doing virtual internships. I'm a little bit out of that loop, but I would recommend, so FEMA EMI, which is the Emergency Management Institute, has a higher education component where all of the academic programs meet consistently and regularly to talk about what they have going on in their programs. I would encourage you to reach out to FEMA EMI Higher Education Group and ask them if they have any programs looking for virtual internship opportunities. If they don't, they can start asking. Also, if they don't, it may get some of these institutions thinking about how can we connect students with virtual opportunities.
Okay, and Julio said, I think he said something about something you said earlier. Awesome that you brought that up. Most military think that because they are vets, jobs are almost guaranteed. They forget that we must learn to follow before we can lead. Awesome point to bring up. I guess something you were saying earlier kind of related to that.
Yeah, again, and that goes back to, especially for those folks looking for second careers. It's a we're in a weird spot because students are coming in with the education that we didn't see before, and then people are coming in with the experience that we've seen. And so it's a weird balance of, what's more important, the education or the experience? I don't know the right answer to that, but just remember, in no matter how long you've been in the field, going into a new position is that someone laid that groundwork for you. And so, use that opportunity to learn before you just speak. And this reminds me too, and this is a good tip that sometimes I talk about. in our little circle of like emergency management directors and stuff, we kind of joke about, we say, we know when a student, like if we're in a group of students, you can almost tell right off the bat who's going to be the student you want to hire, who's the most successful student. And who wants to guess that, or what will be the giveaway? Can anybody give a guess? Now everybody's scared to talk, right? It's who's listening, right? Not who's talking. It's who's listening, especially if you're in a circle of folks that your textbooks are talking about. Listen to everything they say. There's not a time where I'm not in a meeting, even after all this time, especially with some of my colleagues that I have incredible respect for, that I'm not learning. So always listen before you talk, because it's those students that are like, bah, 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 and you're like, okay, yeah, you're going to drive me bonkers, number one. And number two, you're not listening. You're missing what's going on. So.
Oh, I see that Rebecca Stevens has asked, do you have any EM specific tips for an entry-level interview process?
Definitely prepare, and prepare on two sides. Prepare one for, some emergency management background information, know your phases, know what ESF means. They may or may not ask that stuff. But more importantly, do your research on the position that you're looking for. So that if that means I'm going for a job in Pinellas County, I'm going to spend some time learning about who are the leaders in my community, what are the nonprofit groups that really drive some of the policy in my community, what are the hot topics that the commissioners are talking about in my community, and what's the geography of my community. That's another tip that one of my very first mentors ever said is, if you're going to be an EM, you need to learn geography. And so I spent time learning where all the counties were in Florida, which seems silly, but now it's incredibly useful because I can listen to the weather report and know exactly what's happening. So learn the geography of your community. Learn about the culture of the organization that you're interviewing for. Learn about some of their successes. So if they recently revamped their hurricane preparedness guide, know about that and be prepared to talk about that going in. Again, people love to talk about themselves, which now I feel like I've talked about myself a lot, but people love to talk about themselves, and especially in an interview, flatter and be truthful, be honest, but flatter the things that program is doing. Why do I want to work for you? Because I just saw that you guys put out a new hurricane guide and I thought that just looked great. I noticed that you added blah, 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 blah. So do your homework. I think they'll be really impressed by that.
Okay, we have another message from, I believe, Spencer. Yeah, Spencer asked, how do we bridge the gap of EM in many rural communities? I see a lot of good old boy systems still not planning appropriately, and how can we assist them in getting more robust and independent for future disasters?
I think the challenge with that is money, right? It's not about the money, but it's always about the money. And so a lot of these rural programs have an EM director who's also maybe, the animal services director and the mosquito control director. And so they got 45 different projects on their plate. And so unfortunately, until a disaster happens, it's just not on the top of their priority list. But that's when, a strong nonprofit community can help. That's when an intern can help. It's a perfect volunteer opportunity to say, hey, I'm a student at XYZ. I'm learning about mitigation strategies. Could I look at your mitigation strategy and maybe, give you an idea, or maybe not give you an idea, might not be the best way to phrase it, but say, could I look at it and maybe learn from it, right?
Okay. Julio asked, any specific things we should look into taking with EMI? There are almost thousands of courses. Which area should I focus on?
Sure. So number one, focus on what you're interested in, right? So if you do not like mitigation, like I do not like mitigation. So for me, I know that's just not going to hold my attention, but I am really interested in mass care. So take those mass care courses. Also, if there's a specific job that you're looking for, say it's going to be an entry-level planner for a county, take all the planning courses that you can that they offer. So really target whatever it is that you are trying to get to by taking those courses. And then another tip, and I just thought of this, and I can't believe I didn't share this, but this is another one that a mentor shared with me is decide, now who in my future do I want their job? Like, who do I look up to in a specific person, not just one day I want to be director of blah, 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 blah. But one day I really want to be da, 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 da. Write out what you need to get to that point. And if that means I'm going to need to take these courses, or I'm going to need this degree, or I'm going to need to learn about XYZ, start doing that. So pick that job that you want and start figuring out what that person has or what it took to get there. I mean, you could even ask them. That's a great mentorship opportunity, and say, okay, this is where I want to be. Here's how I'm going to get there, and write out your roadmap. Now, your road may not take you there, and that's fine, but you're going to learn along the way skills that you can use anywhere. So pick that kind of goal and figure out what it is to get you there.
I saw in the chat that Spencer replied to what you said about rural communities and good old boy systems and all that. He said, great points, maybe worth looking into assisting them more in the grant writing areas. Thanks again. Alex Griffin said, I think this is really where the increasing trend of the privatization of the EM industry can help these small rural communities when the funds are available. Would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, again, it's all about the money, right? And so, yeah, there's lots of opportunity. It's just the money is, the money drives everything, unfortunately.
Yeah. Cody said, most applications, people struggle with just getting to the interview. What recommendations do you have for building your success to get to the interview phase?
Sure. So this is a good one. Now, a lot of times, especially with so many people applying for positions, that first look through on your interview is a computer. It's not even a person. And so the key to kind of bucking that system or tricking the system is when you see that job posting, pay very close attention to the verbology that they use and the words that they're using. So if they use hazard mitigation strategy experience, somewhere in your resume needs to have those exact words, because that program is going to pull resumes that have those words in it. So if it says they must have these certain trainings, make sure those certain trainings are actually listed, because the computer is just going to do a scan for those words. So pull those keywords and plug them in somewhere. I mean, it needs to make sense, obviously, but plug them in the way you're wording your resume.
Okay, well, so I finally got to all the questions that were stacked up in the chat. Would anyone like to ask on camera? Jessica, anything about, the EM career field, the EM, job seeking process, I guess even some EM stuff in general, you think she could answer? Go for it, guys. Don't be afraid to chime in.
I'll be the first one to chime in. So I think with COVID, at least one of my observations is that the EM industry worldwide has had to collaborate on a higher level than really any other disaster that we've had since EM became a field in itself. Do you think that this trend is going to kind of continue? And how do you think that might change the job landscape?
Yeah, you're right, and I've talked about it a little bit, is we're pulling in partners we've never worked with before. And so really smart EM organizations are going to have to figure out ways to keep that going. How do we continue to engage partners when we're not looking at a disaster? Now, here in Florida, it's a little bit easier because we have a lot of hazards, so we have a lot of disasters. So there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration. But I think, again, on the other hand, too, is we're seeing a whole lot more seriously than they did before, because now they have remote workforces, and now they have technology that they didn't have before. Now they need to figure out how to continue to operate maybe without being in their actual building. And so there's lots of opportunities to collaborate, but also lots of opportunities for plan writers to come in and help kind of create these programs for all sorts of different entities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Brad, if you want to just unmute yourself, go for it.
Okay, thank you. I have a question for you. How do you stay current? I was at a EM interview a couple years ago, and that was a question I was asked. and I was relatively new to the field, so I kind of stumbled on that. But how do you stay current? Because things are always changing.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think being involved with the association, one of the perks of the association is when session is meeting here in Florida, we get weekly updates on where any sort of legislation that has to do with almost anything in our field, from public records to public safety to pandemic preparedness, we get updates on those bills. So as laws may be changing, we're keeping current with that. And then also with the association, we're keeping current because we're involved in the working groups. So as things change, we're hearing what each other is doing, we're sharing best practices, we're sharing what didn't work so that we can avoid that in our own communities. Yeah, going back to the networking, reading what people are posting on LinkedIn, reading the blogs that some of the private sector professionals write. Yeah, just kind of keeping up with the work.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, if anyone wants to ask anything, feel free to unmute yourself. Don't be shy. Well, yeah, sure. I'll ask something. Do you often see, because you see people in EM who come in from other career fields like military, for example. Have you, Jessica, known anyone who's done a lot of EM work over the years or decades and then gone into other fields, using that as like their resume?
I don't know, that's interesting. I think maybe we see a lot of people who retire out and then go into consulting, because then you can choose and pick what you do. You do trainings, or you'll go do a disaster and come home. So lots of folks who retire out of emergency management move to either a consulting company like a firm, or they do their own consulting companies. So I see that a lot. I think if you're leaving EM and you're not ready to retire, it's because you're burnt out. So I would imagine you'd go do anything else except this. That's a hard question to ask after COVID, because it's been a pretty tough year for everybody. I think everyone's sort of feeling that burnout a little bit. We're looking at hurricane season. So we've seen a lot of people who are like real close to retire this year because they've just, kind of had enough and hung their last cap on COVID, which I certainly can't fault anybody for. But I think we're going to see a big shift of new professionals in the field with all of these folks retiring. We'll see some folks move up, but I think we're seeing a lot of people from non-traditional things moving over more so. And then just people who are lucky enough to retire.
Okay, interesting. What would you say? How do I word this properly? What would you say, like, at least from your personal experience, what do you feel like the pros and cons are overall, like in the big picture of life, of working in EM compared to, family or friends or that who are in totally different fields, if you ever compare, just out of curiosity?
That's a very loaded question. I think if you want to do EM, you have to want to do EM, because there's a lot of sacrifice that comes with that. It can be incredibly stressful. This past year, it was incredibly stressful. There's a lot of camaraderie in our little EM family, so we draw from each other. And I don't want to say other jobs aren't stressful, but there's a different level, I think, of responsibility, because for us, it's hurry up and ramp up, and then it slows down. I mentioned a lot of sacrifice. You miss birthdays, you miss holidays sometimes. When I was deployed, I missed a whole lot being gone. But I also think you have the satisfaction of knowing that the work you're doing matters. And whether that's you're on the ground handing someone a meal after they've lost their home, or if you're up at a state EOC, making sure that they have the ICE resources that they need to make that meal happen, there's a greater good. One of the things that kind of pinches my nerve is when a student's like, well, I just want to help people and change the world. That's great. But what does it mean beyond that, right? Like, how can we really help people prepare better for that disaster? Like, is the sacrifice I'm making really worth that? And it's got to be worth that for you, or you're gonna you're not going to stick around in this field. You're just not. If you're wired like an emergency manager, you love problem solving, you love somebody saying, here's an impossible task, you have 5 seconds and a piece of bubble gum and duct tape, how do we fix it? So there's a part of your brain that's wired to love that. Not a lot of sleep, not a lot of healthy eating sometimes. But again, it's like a family and you rely on each other. We keep saying the next FPEA, the next governor, so it's been a long time since we've all been together. It's going to be more of like a therapy session for all of us to kind of relive this past year, more so than we're going to learn anything. So there's a benefit in that because we do care for each other. We really do. We know each other's kids, we know each other's lives, and we spend a lot of time in the trenches with people. It just creates a bond that, you can't replicate in a lot of other jobs, I think.
All right, cool. So would anyone else like to ask anything?
I've got a quick question if we're got any time left. I think we got a little bit of time left. So I'm going to ask the hard question. Just from the talk that we've had tonight, it sounds like the EM field is in need of generalists with strong soft skills, ability to deal with policy, planning, and people. What does the field not need right now? What skills, what trainings, what specializations does EM not need any more of right now?
One of the challenges that we're seeing with the academia kind of becoming more professionalized is we're seeing a lot of educated young people coming in with this book knowledge. And that's great because you know the processes, you understand the concepts. But when you're in the heat of it, like the plan goes out the window 99% of the time. And so we don't need students who come in thinking, well, I have a master's degree or I have a PhD and this and that, and I know how to research. That's great. But when it hits the fan, we need someone who can make decisions under pressure. We need someone who can make smart decisions under pressure. We need people who can lead a team and motivate a team who's really tired or burnt out. We need folks who know how to make decisions that are critical. Sometimes it's evacuation decisions that need to be made. They're not going to be easy and they're going to be expensive. And if it works, it's going to cost a lot of money and someone's going to be on you. And if it doesn't work, you're going to lose lives. So we need people that can kind of be that calm, cool under pressure, and take that book knowledge, but be able to translate it into like real world decision making. And we also need people who can sit in front of a computer and write a plan, because that's what we do most of the time. The exciting part is exciting, but it's that planning process. It's the working with your partners. It's the everyday stuff that you got to be able to keep yourself motivated so that when it happens, you're ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds like you need people who can be very, very versatile and very dynamic, right? Like the blue skies, gray skies sort of thing. Some days will just be like office work and it's pretty peaceful and calm and, maybe even maybe almost boring sometimes, right? But other times it's super hectic and stressful. So yeah, I guess you better have a good capacity for wild fluctuations in heart rate, I guess. That's one way to put it, right?
And we need folks that are willing to do anything, that are willing to jump in. If that means you got to change the toilet paper 1 minute and you need to make evacuation decisions the next, like, yes, that may not be your job, but we've got to be willing to come up with solutions together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, everyone can fill many different roles and do many things within a role for sure. So does anyone else have any questions? Don't be shy. Okay, cool. Well, yeah, thank you once again, Jessica, for speaking to us tonight. This is such valuable knowledge and insight to be hearing from you. And we're going to make sure to email out stuff you brought up, like the volunteer website, information about FPEA, about the FPEA conference that's in August, the recording of this talk and everything. It was really wonderful. So thank you once again. Round of applause.
Thank you guys so much. Feel free to reach out. If you don't hear from me in a couple weeks, I'll give you permission to email me again. I probably just got lost in my email box. if there's ever anything I can do, check your social media and lock it down as soon as you get off of here. And please join FIPA, join the Student Association. I think you'll see a lot of value in it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I highly recommend you all get involved in FIPA. And yeah, I try to attend the conference in early August. I believe it's going to be in Crystal River. So huge for networking. You know, if you go there, you'll be able to meet Jessica. You'll be able to meet me in person and many other people involved in EM stuff in Florida. And also, yeah, we'll make sure to send out Jessica's contact info, like her LinkedIn and whatnot. So yeah, thank you once again. I see a lot of thank yous in the chat, so it was very helpful to people, and we really appreciate it.
All right, good luck, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Jessica.
All right, so for those of you who are sticking around for our election that is now taking place soon after the speaker, I will give people a few moments to, if you want to get a drink or use the bathroom or something, kind of take like a little bit of intermission. And for anyone who wants to stick around, ask any of the board any questions about anything with the chapter, you know, go for it.